Okay, so let's just start. We'll recite this 3 times. So this first two lines are taking refuge, and the second 2 lines are generating bodhicitta. The taking refuge sort of cements our self-identity as a Buddhist, as a follower of teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha. And of the 2 divisions of the Buddha's teachings, Hinayana and Mahayana, generating bodhicitta signifies that we're practitioners of the Mahayana path, the great vehicle path, the path to full enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. So we'll do that. Sangye chodang sogi chonam la chanchu padu dagi kapsuchi dagi chojingi pesonam ki rola penche sangye drupa sho. Sangye chodang sogi chonam la chanchu padu dagi kapsuchi dagi chojingi pesonam ki rola penche drupa sho. Sangye chodang sogi chonam la changchu padu dagi kapsuchi dagi chojingi pesonam ki rola penche sangye drupa sho.
That's all we have.
Yeah, that's all we need.
Good. All right, over to you, Dr. Nick. I'll leave the controls alone.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining this morning. And we'll just start with a couple of minutes meditation on the breath. So I don't know if anyone's here for the first time or not, but usually I like to start with a short meditation on the breath just to calm, steady, and center our mind. And so when we meditate, you probably are familiar with the recommended meditation posture. This is called the Virachana posture, and it was promoted particularly by the great Mapa, the translator, who lived in Tibet around nearly 1,000 years ago. He used to go to India to study with his teacher Naropa, the great Mahasiddha Naropa, and then he'd bring teachings back to Tibet and translate them into Tibetan, and that's why he was called Mapa the translator. And he's probably even more famous for being the guru of the great Milarepa, the great yogi of Tibet, who achieved enlightenment in a single lifetime and exemplified the benefits of unswerving devotion to the teacher, which is what allowed him to reach enlightenment so quickly. So this position has 7 main points. So generally we sit on, okay, this is the Zoom era, so you're going to see that I'm naked from the waist down. No, I'm not really. But, look, shorts. It's over 90 here today. So I'm sitting on a large square cushion called a zabuton, and then there's this small cushion under your backside called a zafu. I mean, those are the Japanese names. So sorry about the peep show aspect. But just to show you, that's what we ideally sit on a cushion with our backside slightly higher. So the advantage of that is it helps keep your back straight. And sitting on the cushion, you can sit in, just ordinary cross-leg position, or you don't have to cross your legs at all. You can just sit with one leg in front of the other, usually the right leg in front. Or you can do the full lotus, where the back of each foot rests on the opposite thigh. And again, the right leg crosses in front of the left. And or you can do the half lotus, where just the right foot rests on the back of your left thigh and your left leg is on the cushion. Okay, so cross-legged. If you're sitting in a chair, that's okay too. Remember, you've got to keep your back straight, don't kind of lean back. And if you can have your feet flat on the floor, flat on the ground, and if they don't reach to go flat, you can put a cushion under your feet, but to keep them sort of flat like that is recommended. So cross-legged, straight back, shoulders level, parallel with the floor, then your neck slightly bent forward. So not up, back like that, and not sort of slumping down like that. Generally, we begin as we close our eyes, but more experienced meditators, I don't know if you can see, but their eyes are slightly open. So that's recommended. Just have them slightly open as it lets some light into the mind. Usually when we close our eyes, we're going to go to sleep. And if we're trying to meditate with our eyes closed, sometimes that triggers something and we kind of get sleepy and our mind gets sluggish. So keeping your eyes slightly open is good to let light in, but also it means you could be distracted by things in your line of vision. Anyway, you work it out. So then our lips are closed and the tip of your tongue touches the front of your hard palate, just behind your top teeth. So it's said that experienced or more advanced meditators, when they're in deep meditation, in single-pointed concentration, the flow of saliva increases. I don't know why. And if your tongue is touching the roof of your mouth just behind your top teeth, it allows the saliva just to go down your throat without you having to swallow, which could be a distraction. So like that. And your teeth are just, your lower jaw is relaxed. And so, you know, your teeth aren't clenched. And then your arms are slightly rounded away from your sides, and your hands rest in your lap with the right hand on palms upward, back of your right hand in your left palm, and the tips of your thumbs touching. So that's Marpa the translator's recommended posture. So cross-leg, straight back, neck slightly bent forward, arms rounded away from your sides, with your hands in your lap, tips of your thumbs touching, eyes lightly closed, your lips closed, tip of your tongue touching hard palate behind your top teeth, and your shoulders level, parallel with the floor. So then sometimes people talk about an 8-point posture, the 8th being then meditation on the breath, which we're about to do. So I'm just going to do this just now. This is the introduction to the meditation posture, which is going to last us 4 weeks. So adopting that posture, or whatever meditation posture works best for you. And bring your mind inside, away from external objects of distraction, visual objects, auditory objects, sounds, and so forth. And then once your mind is sort of brought inside, we have to keep it away from internal distractions as well, mainly the discursive, chattering monkey mind that wants to run everywhere at the slightest provocation. So keep it, and then the other distraction that I mentioned before, the sleepy, sluggish mind. So those are the two main distractions we have to be aware of, particularly the discursive, chattering mind. Then find your breath, where it goes out and comes in through your nostrils. So that's going to be where we focus our attention, our concentration, just on the breath coming and going. So generate a strong determination. Think, I'm going to meditate on my breath for as long as I can without distraction. So let's just do that for a minute or so, see how that goes. So when we're doing this kind of concentrating or focusing or placement or stabilizing meditation, it has different, people call it different things, but it's really trying to develop single-pointed concentration. That is, keeping our mind unwaveringly on a single object for long periods of time, as long as we want. So that's the goal. So it's also called mindfulness. Everybody's heard mindfulness. So mindfulness just means remembering. We've picked our object. It's our breath coming and going through our nostrils, focusing at the entrance of our nostrils. So we have to remember that's what we're focusing on. We have to be mindful of that. So 95% of our mind is practicing mindfulness, remaining on the object without leaving it. But then a small corner of our mind, like 5%, 4 or 5%, is like a sentry, sort of aware, vigilant, watching for distractions. And then if this kind of watchful alertness sees a distraction sort of coming over the horizon, it deflects it so that it doesn't disturb the main part of our mind, which is focused on the breath. So that's also something we have to develop through practice, this kind of awareness of impending distraction. And, you know, figuring out how to stop that impending distraction from becoming an actual distraction and taking our mind away from the breath. So usually that doesn't work very well, and we find that all of a sudden we're thinking about this or we're thinking about that, our mind has completely gone off the breath. So what we do then is just drop the distraction, don't get involved in it, maybe make a mental note, that was, I got distracted, and then come straight back to the breath. So then sometimes it helps us assess our progress or our ability at doing this meditation. It helps to count the breaths. So you count every in-breath or every out-breath as one. You don't count in 1, out 2, in 3, like, so every in-breath, say, is 1. You just make a little mental note. 1, 2. Okay, so let's just practice that again for a couple of minutes, trying to remember all those points. Okay, so now if we've done this meditation effectively, our mind should be a little calmer and clearer than it was before. So at this point, we can look into our mind and check our motivation, the reason for our being here, doing this session. So why am I doing this? So if you find that your motivation is one of simply seeking some benefit, for this life alone, you recognize that sort of motivation as coming from one of the negative minds of attachment. And as such, it's a negative motivation. It's a cause of suffering. It leaves an imprint on our consciousness, like planting a seed that ripens into experience of suffering of one kind or another. So then we determine not to follow that motivation, but replace it with a positive one. So we'll talk about different kinds of motivation later. So there are 3 levels of positive motivation. The highest level is what we call bodhicitta, like what we generated in the second 2 lines of the prayer we did at the beginning. Bodhicitta is, the mind determined to reach enlightenment in order to be able to enlighten all sentient beings. So we can generate that thought briefly by thinking, the purpose of my life is to lead all sentient beings from suffering to enlightenment. In order to do that, first I have to reach enlightenment myself. And my reaching enlightenment depends upon studying, practicing, and realizing the entire path to enlightenment, all the hundreds and thousands of steps on the path to enlightenment, the graduated path to enlightenment, the steps of the path to enlightenment. Learning what each step is, understanding what it means, and then realizing it. So in order to understand and what the path to enlightenment is, what it looks like, what these various stages and steps are, I'm going to study the lamrim glance meditation called The Foundation of All Good Qualities, written by Lama Tsongkhapa, the founder of our tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. And following the commentary by the great modern-day bodhisattva, Khunu Lama Rinpoche. So I'm going to study this text over today and the next 4 weeks in order to reach enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So in that way, we generate bodhicitta, the highest level of motivation. And actions done with the bodhicitta motivation are what become causes of our reaching enlightenment. Okay, so, excuse me. If anyone has a question at any time, I don't mind if you jump in, or you can put it in the chat and then we can have a look at it towards the end. but I'm sure so far everything's been so clear that you don't have any questions. Now, our teachers are Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And okay, so I'm not going to go into all the history, we've done that already. But you know, as Mary mentioned before in the introduction, I'm at the moment, since 96, I've been running the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive. So this is the collection of all the teachings of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. We have the recordings and we transcribe them and we edit them and we publish them in different ways. When we started, the internet was just starting, so a lot of our early work was publishing these little free books. So I came to the archive from Wisdom Publications, which, as Mary mentioned, I helped set up back in Kopan in Nepal in 75 with Lama Yeshe. And so, you know, wisdom has developed really well over, you know, 45, 46 years that it's been going. The main development was after I left. So, and it's just doing amazingly well. They're publishing some incredible, amazing teachings that, you know, 50 years ago, we could have only dreamt about. You know, 50 years ago, there were almost no Dharma books available. So it's an amazing thing, the explosion of Dharma publishing that's happened over the last few decades. So we're very lucky now to have, you know, more books than we could ever read in a lifetime. Back then, you could read all the books that were available in about a week. So in English. So, and also as Mary mentioned, you know, I've been involved in getting a few FPMT activities going, like wisdom, like the Tushita Meditation Centre in Delhi, and Kurukulla Center here in Boston. And I was the first director of the International Mahayana Institute, the FPMT Association of Monks and Nuns. And also I was involved, first 5 years of my so-called career in Dharma, I was living at Kopan Monastery, so I was involved in trying to help finance, get money, you know, raise money for supporting the young Nepalese Tibetan monks there at Kopan. So with most of these projects, the standard thing was to produce some kind of brochure and then send that out and say, this is what we'd like to do. We want to rent this place. We want to buy this place. We want to bring this teacher. We want to do this. We want to do that. Please give us money. So, so when I was asked to leave Wisdom and start the archive 25 years ago, I thought about doing the same thing, producing a brochure, but instead I'd edited some of Lama Yeshe's teachings, some of his public talks over the years for different public, you know, magazines and stuff. And so I put together 3 of them and produced actually a little booklet called Becoming Your Own Therapist, which was kind of one of Lama's themes, you know, that, you know, when he contacted Western people, everyone had their therapist or their psychologist or their counselor or their psychiatrist, whatever, you know. So Lama's thing was learn about your own mind and become your own therapist. You know, you can solve your own problems. You don't need to go to somebody else. So anyway, we made this little booklet and we sent it around, and we had an overwhelmingly positive response to it. That, you know, we were making these teachings available in book form. It was a booklet really, for free. So that kind of set us on the path. That experience set us, and then people sent money to support the archive, and we were able to get going that way. You know, when they ask you to start an organization, the FPMT, they don't give you any money. So we have to, and that's what Lama used to say when people would ask him if they could start a center. He would sometimes say yes, sometimes say no. When he said yes, but it's your baby. You know, you have to finance it. You have to take care of all the legal things, and you know, we'll come and teach, meaning him and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And then later he would send Western Sangha or Tibetan Geshis to go to be resident teachers at the centers. So they started like that. But it was very clear that the students who wanted to start the center were responsible for all the administrative and financial stuff. So then we started doing these free books, and we still do them. So there's a new one coming, in fact, expecting it to be delivered today or tomorrow, called Lamrim Year. And then there's another book coming in a couple of months called Nectar of Bodhicitta. So there's a couple new free books that we'll be publishing. So this first one, Becoming Your Own Therapist, actually we finished up putting it together with the second or third book we did, which was called Make Your Mind an Ocean. So it's a collection of 7 public talks that Lama Yeshe gave on his second trip to the West in 1975. That back then I was a monk, and I was accompanying Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche on that trip. We traveled around the world literally over about a 9-month period. And Lama gave some amazing talks to people who'd never seen a Tibetan monk before, hadn't had any contact with Buddhism. And so this book's available from the archive if you want it. It's all available freely online at lamayeshe.com. And this little series we're doing here, Buddhism in a Nutshell, is, you know, I know a lot of you are experienced Dharma students and Dharma practitioners, so this course isn't exactly designed for you. It's designed, I think, for people coming into Buddhism maybe for the first time or with not that much experience. So that's the approach of this series. And of course, you know, I don't have enough knowledge to do anything more than the very basic stuff anyway, so it's a good match that way. And that was Lama's intention when he gave these talks too, that he was meeting people for the first time, and he was their first experience of a Tibetan Lama. So I'll just read a couple of opening sentences and paragraphs from some of these talks where Lama explained what Buddhism is. When we study Buddhism, we're studying ourselves, the nature of our own minds. Instead of focusing on some supreme being, Buddhism emphasizes more practical matters, such as how to lead our lives, how to integrate our minds, and how to keep our everyday lives peaceful and healthy. In other words, Buddhism always accentuates experiential knowledge wisdom rather than some dogmatic view. In fact, we don't even consider Buddhism to be a religion in the usual sense of the term. From the Lama's point of view, Buddhist teachings are more in the realm of philosophy, science, or psychology. So then followed a great talk. And then another talk, Lama said, people have many different ideas about the nature of religion in general and Buddhism in particular. Those who consider religion and Buddhism at only the superficial, intellectual level will never understand the true significance of either religion or Buddhism. And those whose view of religion is even more superficial than that will not even consider Buddhism to be a religion at all. First of all, in Buddhism, we're not interested in talking about the Buddha himself, nor was he. He wasn't interested in people believing in him. So to this day, Buddhism has never encouraged its followers simply to believe in the Buddha. We've always been more interested in understanding human psychology, the nature of the mind. Thus, Buddhist practitioners always try to understand their own mental attitudes, concepts, perceptions, and consciousness. Those are the things that really matter. Otherwise, if you forget about yourself and your delusions and focus instead on some lofty idea, like what is Buddha, your spiritual journey will become a dreamlike hallucination. That's possible. Be careful. In your mind, there's no connection between Buddha or God and yourself. They're completely separate things. You're completely down here. Buddha or God is completely up there. There's no connection whatsoever. It's not realistic to think that way. It's too extreme. You're putting one thing down at the lower extreme and the other way up at the upper. In Buddhism, we call that kind of mind dualistic. Another talk. These are the introductory bits. The study of Buddhism is not some dry intellectual undertaking or the skeptical analysis of some religious philosophical doctrine. On the contrary, when you study Dharma and learn how to meditate, you are the main topic. You are mainly interested in your own mind, your own true nature. Buddhism is a method for controlling the undisciplined mind in order to leave it from suffering to happiness. At the moment, we all have undisciplined minds. But if we can develop a correct understanding of its characteristic nature, control will follow naturally and we'll be able to release emotional ignorance and the suffering it brings automatically. Therefore, no matter whether you're a believer or a non-believer, religious or not religious, a Christian, a Hindu or a scientist, black or white, an Easterner or a Westerner, the most important thing is to know your own mind and how it works. And finally, when I talk about mind, I'm not just talking about my mind, my trip. I'm talking about the mind of each and every universal living being. The way we live, the way we think, everything is dedicated to material pleasure. We consider sense objects to be of utmost importance and materialistically devote ourselves to whatever makes us happy, famous or popular. Even though all this comes from our mind, we're so totally preoccupied by external objects that we never look within. We never question why we find them so interesting. As long as we exist, our mind is an inseparable part of us. As a result, we're always up and down. It's not our body that goes up and down, it's our mind. This mind, whose way of functioning we do not understand. Therefore, sometimes we have to examine ourselves, not just our body, but our mind. After all, it is our mind that is always telling us what to do. We have to know our own psychology, or in religious terminology, perhaps, our inner nature. Anyway, no matter what we call it, we have to know our own mind. So this is another of our free books, Teachings from Tibet. And so this is a collection of, actually I first published this book in Delhi. When I was running the Tushita Center there, we published a book called Teachings at Tushita in about 81. And that was just for local distribution, really. But the center there, it was a Dharma center, and it was also a guest house for Dharma students who were living in India and Nepal and passing through Delhi, either coming into India from abroad or going back home or whatever, or just coming down to Delhi to renew their visas or their passports or many reasons. So people would stay at the center. It was a way that we helped finance the center. And we also had teachings there. A regular teacher in the early days was Gelek Rinpoche, who then later came to America and founded the Jewel Heart Centers. But he was our regular teacher for a while. And then, just as Westerners, and they were mostly Westerners who stayed at the center, were passing through Delhi, so were a lot of the Lamas. At that point, there were many Geshis and other Lamas living in Dharma centers in the West, and they would come back to India from time to time, or there are other teachers who were living in India and coming to Delhi for one reason or another, and other teachers coming to Delhi before going to the West. So whenever an important, I can't think of the right adjective. Anyway, whenever a teacher came that we wanted to teach, we would invite them to come and give a talk at the center. So we collected these talks and published them in this book. So, we organized some teachings with His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Delhi. He didn't actually come to the center itself. But His Holiness Ling Rinpoche and His Holiness Trijang Rinpoche came there and gave talks. They were the senior and junior tutors of His Holiness at the time. And it just strikes me that His Holiness doesn't have senior or junior tutors. The Dalai Lama's always had senior and junior tutors. I'm not sure if it was for just when they were young. Maybe it was just when they were young. But anyway, both those Lamas passed away in the early 80s. But also His Holiness Serkong Rinpoche, who was one of His Holiness's Sanchabs, the debate partners, and His Holiness Song Rinpoche, Serkong Rinpoche, Song Rinpoche, Geshe Rabden, Geshe Zopa, many of these great Geshis and senior Lamas who came out of Tibet and who are unfortunately no longer with us. They came and gave talks at the center, so we collected those talks. And so we revived that publication with some extra teachings and other things for this book called Teachings from Tibet. And so one of the teachings in here is what we're going to be looking at over these few weeks. Was it's 10 to 11 over there in New Mexico now, isn't it? So we have another hour or so. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
yes, it is.
This teaching that we're going to be looking at over the next few weeks, Foundation of All Good Qualities, with a commentary by Khunu Lama Rinpoche, is also in this book. But when we first published it, I wrote a kind of introduction or a preface, because the lamrim genre of teachings wasn't very well known to Indian people. And so I did kind of, introduction from the teachings that I'd heard at that point. So, so I'll just read a little of that. So the Buddha taught so that beings would be happy and satisfied. Having attained the ultimate happiness of enlightenment himself, out of love and compassion for each sentient being, he wanted to share his experience with them all. But he could not transplant his realizations into the minds of others, remove their suffering by hand, or wash away their ignorance with water. He could only teach them to develop their minds for themselves, as he had done. Thus, he showed the path to enlightenment. So that little bit comes from the lamrim Stages of the Path teachings on refuge, where it explains how the Buddha guides beings, and it's said that the power of karma and the power of the Buddha are sort of equal. So the Buddha can only work with our karma, and the Buddha can't unilaterally sort of eradicate our negative karma, which causes our suffering. All he can do is show us how to do it for ourselves. So, we have to understand what karma is and how it can be changed, how it can be purified, how good karma can be created, and how karma is really the root cause of the suffering we don't want, and how good karma is the root cause of the happiness that we do want. So the Buddha guides us by showing us the path, and we have to recognize that as the path, and then do whatever we have to do to follow it according to the way the Buddha explained that we should follow it. So, okay, now about the mind. So you saw Lama always emphasize the importance of knowing our own mind. So there are two kinds of beings with mind: Buddhas and sentient beings. Buddhas were once sentient beings, but through engaging in and completing the practice of Dharma, so Dharma is what we call the teachings of the Buddha, they fully purified their minds of both gross and subtle obscurations and attained enlightenment, or Buddhahood. So there are Buddhas and sentient beings. There are also two kinds of sentient beings: those beyond cyclic existence and those within. Those beyond cyclic existence have purified their mind of the gross obscurations, but not the subtle. Beings within cyclic existence are suffering from both levels of obscuration and are under the control of the disturbing negative minds, delusions, and their imprints on the consciousness, karma. The mind or consciousness is formless. This formless mind also has, the mind or consciousness is formless, just like empty space. It has no shape or color. But unlike empty space, this formless mind also has the property of awareness, the ability to perceive objects. Additionally, the mind is impermanent. That is, it's changing from moment to moment. All impermanent phenomena are the products of causes. Thus, so is the mind. It does not arise from nothing. Furthermore, since effects must be similar in nature to their principal causes, the principal cause of the mind must also be a formless entity able to perceive objects, and not some material substance such as the brain. So generally, we're taught, we grew up in, we were educated in a society that strongly believes that the mind is a product of brain activity somehow, chemical, electrical, something, No one has ever proven this, but this is the assumption we all grow up with, and it's rarely challenged. But the mind is formless, and as it is the result of cause, its principal cause must also be formless. So that's what this is trying to establish. In other words, the mind proceeds from a previous state of mind. Each thought moment is preceded by a prior thought moment, and there has never been a first. The very first thing that Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to teach students in Nepal, Kopan courses, the meditation courses that were really you could almost say the principal cause of the whole FPMT organization, all these centers and everything that have developed over the last 50 years. Without those Kopan courses, none of this would have happened. And the very first teaching that Rinpoche gave was, apart from his introductory talk about the benefits of Dharma and all that, not to dismiss those, but the very first actual teaching he gave was the mind is beginningless. So you'll never find that teaching in Tibetan texts, because in Tibet, everybody knew the mind was beginningless. But in the West, nobody knows the mind is beginningless. Everybody thinks the mind begins with the brain at some point in the womb or when the baby comes out or whatever. I mean, no one's ever really been able to pinpoint when the mind starts functioning. There has never been a first mind moment. Mind is beginningless. Moreover, each being's mind comes from its own previous continuity and not from another mind, such as some cosmic consciousness or the minds of one's parents. Hence, each individual's mind is beginningless. And just as physical energy never goes out of existence, disappearing into nothingness, mass and energy are interchangeable, but they don't disappear. And just as physical energy never goes out of existence, disappearing into nothingness, so too does mental energy continue forever. Only its state changes. So then the next bit is how is it possible to attain enlightenment? The mind is also different from empty space in that it has clear light nature. Our mind is like a mirror smeared with filth. Its clear light nature is polluted by our delusions. However, just as the adventitious filth is not inextricably mixed with the potentially pure, clear mirror beneath, similarly, our delusions are not one with the mind. So our clear light nature is like the blue sky, and the delusions are like clouds that obscure the blue sky from view. Delusions are not one with the mind. And just like an appropriate method, such as washing with soap and water, will clean a mirror, the right way to purify the mind of the delusions and their impressions, the subtle obscurations, is to practice Dharma. This results in the ultimate happiness of enlightenment, and since the minds of all sentient beings have clear light nature, all sentient beings have the potential to become Buddha. The difficulty lies in finding the opportunity to practice Dharma and the interest in doing so. Okay, so that's from that. So anybody have any questions on that so far? Okay. So the Buddhist worldview was kind of mentioned briefly there, in that when we talk about the two kinds of sentient beings, those within cyclic existence and those beyond cyclic existence. So what is cyclic existence? The Sanskrit word for it is samsara. In Tibetan, I don't know if that's the Tibetan Sipe Kolo is a direct translation from the Sanskrit. The Tibetan word means that the wheel of existence. So we call it cyclic existence. And that this samsara, this wheel of, I don't know if you have do you have a picture of the wheel of life at the center? I mean, nobody's going there, I guess, these days.
We do.
Yeah.
I know we do have postcards as well, but you're right, no one's going there yet.
Yet. So anyway, if you Google the wheel of life, Google Images, you'll find loads of them if you're not familiar with it. But I know, do we have one we could put up? Anyone have anything handy?
I'm just trying to find one right now, Dr. Nick.
Oh, I think I have one.
Sorry, I didn't know I was going to go here, but here we are.
I have a couple.
You go ahead, Mary.
They may be hard to read, but here goes one.
Yeah, I mean, that'll do. We don't need to see the details right now. But so so that's good. So this guy with the teeth and the claws, he's called Yama, and the Lord of Death. So it's symbolic, but he shows that all the sentient beings within cyclic existence are are subject to death and rebirth, beginningless death and rebirth. It's a wheel; it goes round and round. There's no beginning. So we've been stuck in here somewhere since beginningless time. So, That's a pretty long time. There's nothing longer than beginningless time. So is that obvious? So one, two. So this is just showing 5 realms. Actually, most of them, classically, they'll show 6. So this upper left quadrant from sort of 9 o'clock to 1 o'clock is the so-called celestial realm, the God realm. So normally it's divided into 2. The Sanskrit word for gods is suras, and the anti-gods or the non-gods is asuras. So we don't really need to go into that right now. Then this other one between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock is the human realm. So that those constitute the 3 upper realms. So those are realms of relatively less suffering. The lower realms are existences with the most intense suffering. So the bottom segment there is the hell realm, the realm of the greatest suffering, and the one on the left there, between 8 and 9 o'clock, is the animal realm. So that that and the opposite, on its opposite side, the human realm, are the really only realms that we can perceive with the sort of mind that we have. On the right, between 3 and 4 o'clock, there's the preta realm, the hungry ghost realm. So the Buddhist worldview is that all beings, the humans that we can see, the animals that we can see, and the other beings that we can't see, live within cyclic existence, in one of these 6 realms. And they, at the hub of the wheel, the very center, there are a pig, a chicken, sometimes they say it's a pigeon, and a snake. So the pig is holding the bird's tail feathers in its mouth, and the bird is supposed to be holding the snake in its mouth. Not shown that way. So there are many different ways of depicting this. And the snake should be holding the pig's tail. But maybe these guys are taking a bit of time off. So, but this symbolized what the Buddha called the 3 poisonous minds, which really drive all of cyclic existence and have been driving samsaric sentient beings since beginningless time. And of the 3, the root poisonous mind is ignorance, symbolized by the pig. So the pig symbolizes fundamental ignorance, and arising out of ignorance is attachment, which is symbolized by this bird. Sometimes it's said to be, sometimes some lamas say it's a rooster, and it symbolizes attachment and craving desire, because roosters can have sex 25 times a day. But that's no reason to wish to be born in that state. And from attachment comes hatred, symbolized by the snake. So the ignorance, attachment, and aversion, or anger or hatred, different shades of these 3 principal delusions. These are what drive cyclic existence. Acting under the influence of ignorance, attachment, and aversion, we create negative karma. And the negative karma causes us to be reborn in the lower realms. So The next circle, around that central hub, shows certain beings whose karma to be in the lower realms has finished, and they're getting reborn in the upper realms, so going up. And then on the right-hand side, with the dark background, there are beings who were born in the upper realms, but created a lot of negative karma in that life and in previous lives, which caught up with them, and which is causing them to plunge after death into the lower realms. So that's the symbolism there. And then if we go out, make it smaller, then you'll see a bit smaller, just to see the outer rim. So the outer rim shows the 12 links of dependent origination, or the 12 links of cyclic existence. So this, we're not going to go into details here, but this is how sentient beings, how we create karma, which causes us to be reborn in either the upper or the lower realms. So just go in the first one up there, the top, between 12 and 1. Who's doing it? Okay,
I
so
am. Mary, do you see?
Okay, so that first one, so we're going to go around the rim clockwise, but this first one is ignorance. So that's symbolized by a blind man walking with a stick. So ignorance is blind because we don't see reality, we don't see ultimate reality, and we don't even see conventional reality. We don't see karma. We don't understand how karma works. So there's two levels of ignorance. Okay, so the next one. The next link. So the next one shows a potter casting pots. So that is karmic formation. This, under the influence of ignorance, we create karma, and that the next link shows a monkey in a tree chasing fruit. That is consciousness, and the fourth one is it shows people in a boat crossing a river. That's called name and form, or body and mind. The next one is called the six sense objects. So that shows a building with empty windows. I'm not going to, this is quite a detailed teaching, so we're not going to do it at this point. The next one is can you go in a bit on it? Anyway, the next, yeah, so the next one is feeling, then we just keep going, then craving and grasping. Keep going. Go round, go round. Okay, craving, grasping, keep going. Rebirth, aging and death. Sort of becoming, rebirth, and then the last one is aging and death. So, there's quite detailed teachings on all of these points, obviously. That's a little beyond the scope of this series. But I just want to introduce you this Buddhist worldview of, so when we talk about beings in cyclic existence, they're under the influence, we've been living in one of those six realms since beginningless time, dying and being reborn, dying and being reborn. And most of our time in cyclic existence since beginningless time has been in the lower realms, because the cause of rebirth in the lower realms is negative karma, is karma created under the influence of ignorance, attachment, and aversion. And we've never been free from the domination of those three poisonous minds. And it's so easy to act under their influence. To be reborn in the upper realms, we have to act, we have to create karma, positive karma, motivated by mainly by creating karma through the practice of morality and generosity. Those two in particular, if we want to be born human, certainly. But to be born in the upper realms, we have to lead very pure, we have to lead lives of pure moral conduct. And the benefit of that, the result of that is rebirth in the upper realms, which we're experiencing now. And the suffering in the lower realms is much, much greater than the suffering in the upper realms. But still, as we know from our own experience, we're nowhere near free from suffering and dissatisfaction. And, we have the suffering in the upper realms of rebirth, aging, sickness, death, not getting what we want, losing what we have, encountering undesirable circumstances, all these greater and lesser sufferings that we experience throughout our life. So even though this human rebirth is a result of positive karma, constantly we have all these negative karmas ripening and causing us to experience dissatisfaction and suffering every day. So I think, we're all fairly familiar with the story of the Buddha. He was born a prince in a royal family. He renounced the kingdom and went in search of the truth. He studied with all the great teachers who were around in India, northern India at that time. This is like 2,600 years ago. And when he felt he'd learned everything these Hindu teachers had to teach, he still hadn't found the truth that he was looking for. So then he figured he'd have to go off and do it by himself. So then he went and meditated on what he'd understood and what he was learning through his own meditation, and eventually attained a breakthrough that we call enlightenment, where he realized the way in which everything exists. And he'd totally eradicated his ignorance. And so I was talking before about these two levels, obscurations, or, things that obstruct the mind from seeing clearly. So the gross obscurations are these delusions that are at the center of the wheel of life, ignorance, attachment, and aversion. Acting under the influence of these principal delusions has left imprints of these delusions on our consciousness. So even when we eradicate those, the root ignorance and the ignorance, attachment, aversion, and the karma that we created by acting under the influence of those, even when we're free of cyclic existence, we're not fully enlightened. We may be liberated beings, but we're not fully enlightened because we still have the imprints of those delusions on our consciousness. So one example that's given for all this is burning onions in a saucepan. So if you burn onions in a saucepan, there's this kind of black sticky mess that you can clean from the saucepan, and you can get it all kind of shiny again. But if you smell, you can still smell, there's still the smell of the burnt onions remaining in the saucepan. So that's like, even when we get rid of the gross delusions, there are still subtle obscurations. So the gross delusions, ignorance, attachment, aversion, and so forth, they prevent us from attaining liberation from cyclic existence, the suffering realm. But even when we're free, when we're liberated, when we become arhats, we still have the subtle obscurations that prevent us from being fully enlightened. So then we have to engage in the practices that get rid of those. And then, but the good news is that all of this, like the clouds in the sky, they're not one with the sky. So these subtle, gross and subtle delusions are not one with our mind. We can eradicate them by following the right method, by following the path that leads to their eradication. So anyway, after his years of engaging in all different kinds of practices and meditations, Buddha finally attained enlightenment in Bodhgaya. And then the story goes that it was what he experienced was so beyond the realm of normal people's experience that at first he felt that he couldn't put it into words. He couldn't explain it to people. And so for the first 7 weeks after his enlightenment, he didn't give any teachings. But then, he wandered around northern India, and he finished up in a place called, now it's called Sarnath, near Varanasi, which was called Benares back then. And when he'd been studying with Hindu gurus, there were 5 other disciples who he'd been studying with, but then he'd left them and gone off. So he ran into them again, and they saw he was totally transformed, and they asked him, what happened to you? And could you explain what you've learned from your meditation? So then he gave his first teaching, which was called the first turning of the wheel, the first spinning of the wheel of Dharma, the first teaching that the Buddha gave. So of course, over 40 years, the Buddha gave countless teachings, but there are 3 main ones called setting in motion the wheel of Dharma, turning of the wheel. So this was the first one. And the subject of that was what's called the 4 Noble Truths. So these are 4 truths. They're called Noble Truths because these are 4 things that are seen to be true by the noble ones, the Aryas, A-R-Y-A, those who are free from cyclic existence, those who've realized the ultimate nature of their own mind, who've eradicated the gross delusions and attained liberation. So they have a higher level of perception of reality than we do. And these are 4 things that are seen to be true by the noble ones, or those with higher insight. Those with insight into direct perception into the nature of direct perception of the nature of reality. So the 4 truths that they see are the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering, and the truth of the path to the cessation of suffering. So normally when we think of suffering, we'll think of pain, injury, sickness, death, the things I mentioned before, losing what we have, not getting what we want, meeting undesirable circumstances. These are all clearly sufferings. But usually that's what we think of when we hear the word suffering. The Buddha said that the suffering is goes much deeper, runs much deeper than that. He called those obvious sufferings, things that even animals recognize as suffering: hunger, thirst, heat, cold, being attacked by others, fear, all these things that even animals recognize as suffering. The Buddha called that gross suffering, the suffering of suffering. So calling it suffering of suffering is a bit like rubbing it in, but those are obvious sufferings. The second, he taught there were 3 levels of suffering. So that's the gross level. The next level of suffering he called changeable suffering. So that's more difficult to recognize as suffering because we normally label those experiences as happiness. So how can happiness and pleasure be suffering? So those experiences are happiness. They are the result of the ripening of positive karma. Even to have those experiences of pleasure and happiness that we recognize and that we long for, that we strive for, that we don't want to let go once we're experiencing it. Those are temporary happiness, not lasting happiness. So when Buddha talks about happiness, real happiness, we're talking about happiness that lasts. So we know from our experiences, the happiness of, a cool drink on a hot day, or a nice meal when we're hungry, or being in the company of, friends when, lockdown lifts, things like that. Those are not real happiness, true happiness, because they don't last. And what they are is not true happiness. It's just less. It's less suffering. So let's say, we're on the beach and it's a hot day and we're feeling really hot. So we decide to go in the water to cool down. So we're experiencing, the suffering of being too hot. So then we go in the cold water, and as we enter the cold water, the suffering of heat dissipates, and we feel, oh, this is good. This is what I went into the water for. This is good. We're experiencing pleasure, happiness, of cool. But if we stay in the water longer and longer, then we're starting to feel cold. Then we're experiencing the suffering of cold. So then we get out, we go back into the sun. We sit on our towel and the sun warms us up. And, it's nice, feeling the sun warming us up. Then after a while, we're getting too hot again. So then again, we go in the water. So as we feel the cool of the water, we think, oh, this is good, this is pleasure, this is happiness, this is what I wanted. What we don't recognize really is that it's not really pleasure. It's the suffering of being cold has started, but it's starting from a minimal level, and it gradually increases until we experience it as actual suffering. So we're never really free from suffering. It's just we're changing one thing from another. So like when we're hungry and we eat food, as the eating of food dissipates the suffering of hunger, and we feel, oh, nice. Oh, I'm enjoying this food. But if we keep eating, what's going to happen? The feeling of the suffering of being too full is going to arrive. And then, then we have to wait. We have to stop eating. So, these things we do to relieve suffering, getting in the cold water, getting into the warm sun, eating the food, they're just one suffering counteracting another. So we're never really free from suffering. It's just changing from one thing to another. But when we have that moment of pleasure of the cold water or of the nice food, our attachment kind of labels that experience as pleasure, and we have a memory of it as pleasant. And we have that attachment in our mind, and the memory of these pleasant experiences. And then when we, feeling too cold, when we're feeling too hot, when we're feeling too full, and we're uncomfortable, and it feels bad, then we have aversion to that feeling. And then we have an imprint in our mind that, oh, being too hot is bad, being too cold is bad, being hungry is bad. So really, running from one thing to another, changing one thing to another, using one form of suffering as an antidote to another kind of suffering, it's just a life of suffering. This is our life from morning to night. So no wonder by the end of the day we're exhausted. All we can do is, get away from it all by going unconscious for 8 hours. But then even in our dreams, we, experiencing temporary happiness and temporary suffering. So we never really get away from it. So this really is the sentient being's dilemma. And when we have those experiences of pleasure or happiness from the heat, from the cold, from the food, from the music, from the movie, from meeting this friend or that friend, every time attachment arises in our mind, it leaves an imprint, like plants a seed of suffering in our consciousness. So every day we're planting hundreds, if not thousands of seeds of suffering. Occasional, maybe, if we're lucky, occasional positive seed of happiness, but mostly because we're acting under the influence of ignorance, attachment, and aversion, we're creating negative karma. The seeds of future suffering are the seeds of rebirth in the lower realms. So at the bottom of all this is this root ignorance, not understanding the nature of the mind, not understanding the nature of the self, feeling this I, this real I, as if there's some aspect of us here, inside us. Usually we feel it here at our heart, in the center of our chest, not the physical heart. That there's some permanent, independent, truly existent me and I. So, when we say, oh, yesterday I did this, tomorrow I'm going to do that. I like this, I don't like that, as if there's a real unchanging person, the me within us, that's always there, the driver of this car. So if there really were such an I, a real I within us, where could it be? What are we? What we are, what most sentient beings are, is a combination of body and mind. We have a body, we have a mind, and that's it. There's no soul, there's no spirit, there's no third aspect to what we are. We're simply a combination of body and mind. The Buddhism calls this mind-body combination, in the 12 links, it's called name and form, the fourth one. It's a combination, we're a combination of body and mind. Buddhism calls this body-mind collection the 5 aggregates. There are 5 parts to it. The body is the body. That's one. That's the physical aspect. The other is mind, consciousness. So there's feeling, cognition, compositional factors, and consciousness. So these are the 4 mental aspects of these 5 aggregates. The Sanskrit word is skandhas, 5 skandhas, 5 aggregates. So when we talk about the mind, it's not like this single unitary thing. There are the mind actually is divided into 2, into primary consciousnesses and mental factors or secondary minds. So primary minds and secondary minds. So there are 6 principal consciousnesses or primary minds. So these are the 5 sense consciousnesses, the consciousness of sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch. And the 6th one, the mental consciousness. So these are the 6 principal consciousnesses. So, you know, to see a visual object, we have to have the object, we have to have an intact eye sense, and we have to have the visual consciousness. So when those three things are in apposition, object, sense consciousness, sense organ, eye organ, and consciousness, then the experience of seeing something arises. Of course, then all hell breaks loose, but that comes later. So there are 6 principal consciousnesses: sight, smell, hearing, taste, touch, and the mental consciousness. The mental factors are, there are 51 mental factors. So there are 5 ever-present mental factors, there are 5 determining mental factors, there are 11 positive mental factors, there are 6 principal delusions, there are 20 secondary delusions, and there are 4 changeable mental factors. So that adds up to 51. 5 and 5 and 11 and 6 and 20 and 4. So you may have studied that with Gandon, have you? Mind and mental factors, or Lorig?
Yes, yes. A couple years ago, and it's going to be on again, I think this year again.
Yeah, you should really, if you haven't, or even if you have, you should really study those. Very important to know. Knowing mind and mental factors is getting to know yourself, as Lama always says. And Don, his excellent teacher, who was a graduate from the first master's program back in the 90s, and so great opportunity to be able to study with him, I think. So when we so that's you know how we understand the different divisions of the mind. If you know that you know the mind is beginningless and endless, and that you know when we die, our body finishes, but our consciousness continues into the next life, carrying with it all the karmic imprints that have been laid on it since beginningless time, except for those that have been experienced out. So, you know, like seeds that have germinated. And if you know that about the mind, and if you know these different divisions, you know, primary minds and secondary minds and so forth, you know far more about the mind than any, you know, Harvard-educated psychiatrist or any psychiatrist educated anywhere, actually. And because, you know, these people don't really know what the mind is and how it functions. And so they're groping in the dark. Excuse me if I'm insulting anybody here. But it's a fact. You know, the Buddha, who must have, you know, Guru Shakyamuni Buddha, who must have had this, like, I mean, unimaginable presence, you know, which is what prompted his 5 previous colleagues to say, wow, what happened to you? You know, we'll have what you're having. So, so then he gave this teaching on the 4 Noble Truths. I'm still on the second suffering, aren't I? So So the Buddha said, you know, what I teach is true, but don't believe it just because I said so. You know, and then he gave this example of a goldsmith. So I don't know how they work these days. They probably have instruments, but back then, if you know, someone wanted to buy or sell some gold, then the way the goldsmith would assay the metal to see how pure it was this was a rubbing, cutting, and melting. So I guess they rub it, and then they cut it, and then they melt it over heat, and then they can assess its assay its purity that way. So just as a goldsmith assays gold, so examine my words and prove them true or false for yourself. So when we hear about these different aspects of the mind, the principal consciousness, the secondary mind, so on and so forth, the way we examine these teachings is through meditation. The way we prove Buddhism true or false is through developing the three wisdoms, the wisdom of hearing. So we hear something for the first time, the mind is beginningless. Oh, wow, that sounds wrong. So you examine it and understand what is meant by the teaching and think about it. And so subject that new idea to the wisdom of contemplation. So the wisdom of hearing is hearing something true for the first time. The wisdom of contemplation is analyzing, you know, with logical deduction, you know, thinking about it. Is it true? Is it true? What are the implications of this? Does it make sense or not? Does it accord with my experience? Is this teaching like internally consistent? Is it consistent with other teachings? So you examine it in different ways and come to a conclusion. It's right, it's wrong. So this form of meditation is called analytical meditation. So once we come to a correct conclusion, then we say, oh, the mind is beginningless, but what I instinctively have always believed, what I've been taught, what deep in my heart I believe is the mind is not beginningless. The mind began with this life, you know. I don't remember any previous lives. So we have to bridge that gap between what the correct conclusion we've come to through analysis and our habitual belief. So we do that through coming to a conclusion through analytical meditation, and having come to that conclusion, which is different from what we've always believed, focusing on that correct conclusion. The mind is beginningless with single-pointed concentration. So that's the other kind of meditation that we tried to do before on the breath, you know, the placement meditation, the, you know, where we place our mind on a single object and keep it there, concentrated meditation. So then we focus on that for as long as we can. Then, so this is a process for developing the wisdom of meditation, where eventually the correct conclusion that we come to and focused on displaces in our mind the ignorance of that topic, displaces the wrong understanding, and becomes one with our mind. And from then on, we can sort of operate from that basis. So there are hundreds and thousands of these little conclusions that we have to come to through analysis and then focus on single-pointedly and incorporate that wisdom, displace the ignorance of that topic with the wisdom of that topic. So gradually build up our wisdom all the way to enlightenment like that. Okay, so the first noble truth is the truth of suffering. There's the suffering of suffering. There's the changeable suffering, which is not true happiness. It's suffering in disguise. Suffering disguised as happiness sucks us in, because we want to be happy. All sentient beings want to be happy. None of us want suffering. But by not understanding what suffering and happiness are, what true suffering is, what true happiness is, not understanding what causes it, not understanding that these are results of causes that we create. We think, oh, it's the result of this person, or it's the result of the weather, or, it's like all these outside things are what's causing us to be happy and suffer. We don't understand that the principal causes of the experiences of happiness and suffering are in our own mind. And they're the results of causes that we ourselves have created. So, because we have this innate wish to be happy, and then that coupled with the ignorance, understanding, this belief in a real I, then comes the idea that I want to be happy. So this I that doesn't really exist, but that we believe in fervently, this I want to be happy. So then we have these experiences of happiness, when we meet a person that we like, or we meet circumstances that appeal to us, we in this food that we enjoy, we believe, not understanding the mechanism of experiencing suffering and happiness. When we meet these experiences and these people that we like, and we feel good experiencing this, eating that, meeting this person, we think that experience of happiness comes from that person, from the circumstances, from the food, from the music. We think that's the cause of why we feel good. So we get attached to that food. We get attached to that person. We get attached to that experience because we believe those things are the actual cause of the happiness that we crave. Then when something happens to disturb that connection, someone takes away that thing that we're attached to, the person we're attached to leaves us, or, the environment changes from a good one to a bad one, then we get upset, we get angry, we have aversion, someone takes away this thing, we want to destroy that person because that person is destroying my happiness. That person is taking my happiness away. So this is how the three principal delusions arise: the pig, the chicken, and the snake. We have the wrong conception of the self-existent I who wants to be happy. Then that self-existent I experiences happiness. We get attached to that object that we think brought about the happiness. And then when something disturbs that relationship, we get angry and upset and want to harm whatever it was that disturbed us. So that's how these ignorance, attachment, aversion, and then all these other delusions arise from those three principal ones. There are 6 principal delusions, those 3 are part of it, and there's 20 secondary delusions. So the first level of suffering is the suffering of suffering. It's the ripening of negative karma. The second, changeable suffering, is the little happinesses we experience that, are the ripening of positive karma, but then we react in the wrong way. We get attached to them. We believe that the object is causing the happiness, and we get, dig ourselves deeper into cyclic existence. And then the third level of suffering is called pervasive suffering. And what that refers to is simply having this body and mind, these five aggregates, these five skandhas that are caused by delusion and karma. Just being in this situation of being composed of a body and mind caused by delusion and karma, this is the basis of all future suffering. And it's a guarantee that we're going to suffer. We're going to have suffering of suffering, or we're going to have changeable suffering. Guaranteed. It's just a matter of time. And even if we're not experiencing suffering or changeable suffering at the moment, we're sort of in neutral, very soon one of those other kinds of actual sufferings is going to arise. So we don't see all that. But the noble beings, the Aryas, those who are out of cyclic existence, who've realized the way things are, they see this whole existence as suffering. We see it as desirable, we're attached to it. We love our life for all the wrong reasons. And unless we do something about it, we'll never be free from suffering in this life or in all future lives. So the Buddha, this is the first thing the Buddha taught in detail. So people will be going, oh my God, why? Why is it like this? Okay, maybe it is, but why? So once people opened up, asked why, then the Buddha jumped in with the second noble truth, the truth of the cause of suffering. So having arrived at this cliffhanger, this is where we leave it. So see if you can figure it out. Next week, there'll be a test.
Thank you, Dr. Nick. For those of you that need it, on Friday, Venerable Dundrup is doing How to Be Happy.
Good. So I'll be preempted, okay. Anyway, thank you very much for putting up with me for a couple of hours. If you want to do it again, same time, same place next Monday. But, what we need to do now, there are always three things to a perfect action. There's right motivation. So we generated bodhicitta at the beginning. That's the rightest of all right motivations. We read some of the words of Lama Yeshe, and we talked about the Buddha's teachings on the mind and Four Noble Truths. So definitely right action. So to seal this, so we've definitely created a lot of merit. So in order to protect that merit from being destroyed by, wrong views, anger, so forth, we need to dedicate it. We need to put money in the bank. So do we have a meditation prayer somewhere? So, we dedicated thinking the meaning that we've created merit and we're giving it away to all sentient beings so that all beings can benefit from this effort we've put in for the last couple of hours. And by doing that, we preserve it or protect it from being destroyed until, so it remains there in the sentient being's karmic bank until all are enlightened. Gewa di nu du da lama sangye rugyo ne Rowa chigya malupa deyi sava gopasho. Chanjo senjo rinpoche magye panam ge gyoji kewa nyamba me payam gong ne gong du pelwa sho. Tuzu jang xing jam gong gao we te Zingyong Bewe Kunzo Do Foze Chok Sung Go We Leg Mon Du Drupa Da Sok Du Je Gong Du Shao Ten Sho Jig Ten Kam De Pen De Ma Lu Pa Kan le jung we sam pel yi jin no kan ren kun asum me ten zing ya so wa deb so chu che lun dru sho la ba nu cho sa te ro wa la kya wa kun le a be Din chen che la yang sam jin chok de rig ru su chen la kan rin den bei kye jap so. Beloved teacher, leading your students toward wisdom and compassion, explaining through exacting discernment the steps of the graduated path. You are the unequaled guide. Please live a long and stable life. And one more, you may have heard that our precious teacher here at Kurukulla Center, Geshe Tinley, was in a bad car accident on Friday and is in the Mass General Hospital right now in critical but stable condition, and maybe having surgery today, second surgery. So any merit that we've generated, please also dedicate to Geshe-la's complete recovery, to quick and complete recovery, so that he's able to return to teaching at Kurukulla Center. Geshe Ngon Tenle. Okay, so thanks again, everybody, and hope to see you next week.
Thank you, Dr. Nick.